I watched in absolute terror as the tiny hospital bracelet slipped from my poisoned baby's wrist, her little body convulsing in my arms while the rich woman who did this to us stood smirking in the corner. The heart monitors screamed their warnings as doctors rushed around us, but what the billionaire revealed in that sterile room changed everything I thought I knew about family, betrayal, and the lengths people will go to protect their darkest secrets. This is my story. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena, and I'm what most people would call ordinary. I work as a night shift nurse at St. Mary's Community Hospital, the kind of place where we treat everyone, from homeless veterans to working families who can't afford the fancy private clinics uptown. It's honest work that keeps food on the table and a roof over my head and my 6-month-old daughter Luna's crib. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would ever put me in the same room as billionaires and socialites, but it was enough. Or so I thought. That Thursday started like every other day in my simple life. I had just gotten home from my 12-hour shift, exhausted but grateful to see Luna's beautiful face lighting up when she saw me walk through the door of our small apartment. Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly neighbor who watches Luna while I work, was waiting with her usual warm smile and detailed report about my baby's night. Luna ate well, slept through until 5, and spent the morning babbling at her favorite stuffed elephant. Normal, beautiful, perfect, ordinary life. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, I settled into our morning routine. Luna in her high chair, me preparing her bottle and trying to stay awake long enough to spend quality time with her before I had to sleep. The sunlight streaming through our tiny kitchen window made everything feel peaceful, safe, predictable. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, this same kitchen would become a crime scene, and my baby would be fighting for her life because of someone's twisted idea of revenge. The phone call came while Luna was napping. The voice was smooth, professional, and completely out of place in my world. Miss Elena Vasquez, this is Victoria from Premier Family Services. We have an unusual request that might interest you. I nearly hung up, assuming it was a scam. Premier Family Services handled the domestic needs of the ultra-wealthy, people who lived in a different universe than mine. Why would they be calling a single mother who worked nights to make ends meet? There's been a family emergency, Victoria continued, and we need someone with your specific qualifications immediately. The Ashworth family requires a private nurse for their newborn. The pay is $15,000 for 1 week of work. $15,000. I sat down hard, my legs suddenly unable to support me. That was more than I made in 4 months at the hospital. It was enough to pay off my student loans, fix the leaky roof, maybe even put some money aside for Luna's future. But it also sounded too good to be true, and experience had taught me that things that sound too good to be true usually are. I think there's been a mistake, I said carefully. I work in community health, not private nursing. No mistake, Victoria replied smoothly. Mrs. Ashworth specifically requested someone with your background. Someone who understands what it's like to care for children without unlimited resources. She wants her baby to be cared for by someone who truly values life, not just someone who was born into privilege. She saw your work at the community clinic and was impressed by your dedication. The Ashworth name was familiar to everyone in the city. Jonathan Ashworth owned half the real estate downtown, funded political campaigns, and appeared on the society pages with his perfectly polished family. His wife Vivienne was known for her charity work and her collection of rare art. They lived in a world where $15,000 was probably pocket change, so why were they interested in hiring someone like me? But as I looked around our tiny apartment, at the bills stacked on the counter and Luna's outgrown clothes that I couldn't afford to replace, the why seemed less important than the opportunity. This could change everything for us. This could give Luna the kind of start in life that I never had. I said yes before my practical side could talk me out of it. The next morning, I packed Luna's things and drove to the Ashworth estate, my nerves getting worse with every mile. The address led me through increasingly expensive neighborhoods until I reached a set of iron gates that looked like they belonged to a European castle. The security guard checked my identification 3 times before waving me through to a driveway that was longer than my entire street. The house was magnificent in a way that made me feel small and out of place. Marble columns, perfectly manicured gardens, and windows that sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. I parked my beat-up Honda next to a fountain that probably cost more than my annual salary and tried to calm my racing heart. This was just a job, I told myself. A very well-paying job that would change Luna's life forever. A woman in a crisp uniform met me at the front door and led me through halls lined with paintings that looked like they belonged in museums. The nursery was on the second floor, decorated in soft pastels with furniture that looked handcrafted and expensive. Everything was perfect, beautiful, designed by someone with unlimited money and impeccable taste. But something felt wrong. The room was too quiet, too still, like a showroom instead of a space where a real baby lived and played. That's when I met her. Vivienne Ashworth glided into the nursery like she owned not just the house but the very air we were breathing. She was tall, elegant, and beautiful in the cold, untouchable way that money and professional maintenance could create. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, her makeup was flawless despite the early hour, and her outfit probably cost more than I made in a month. But it was her eyes that made me uncomfortable. They were ice blue and calculating, studying me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be welcomed. "You must be Elena," she said, her voice carrying the accent that rich people seem to develop regardless of where they were actually born. "I hope you understand how important this position is. My son Nathaniel is very precious to me, and I expect nothing but the best care." "Of course, ma'am," I replied, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "I brought my daughter with me, as we discussed. I hope that won't be a problem." "Your daughter?" Vivienne's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something unpleasant crossing her features before the polite mask returned. "Yes, of course. Victoria mentioned you're a single mother. How challenging that must be." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The way she said challenging made it clear she thought it was more like pathetic, but I kept my smile in place. Luna's very well behaved, and having her here won't interfere with my work. "I'm sure it won't," Vivienne said, though her tone suggested she was sure of the opposite. "The staff will show you to your quarters. I trust you'll keep both yourself and your child out of the family's way except when your services are needed." Just like Catherine in the original story, Vivienne was making it clear that I was hired help, not a guest, and that my place was to be invisible unless absolutely necessary. The quarters turned out to be a small suite in the staff wing, comfortable but clearly separated from the main house. Luna seemed fascinated by the new surroundings, crawling around and babbling happily at the expensive toys that had been provided. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to give her this kind of life, this kind of comfort and security. Maybe this job really could change everything for us. That evening, I met baby Nathaniel for the first time. He was about Luna's age, with dark hair and solemn eyes that seemed too old for his tiny face. He was perfectly healthy, beautifully dressed, and clearly well cared for. But something about him seemed sad. He didn't smile or babble like Luna did. He just watched everything with those serious eyes, as if he was already learning not to expect joy from the world around him. His father Jonathan appeared while I was giving Nathaniel his evening feeding. He was a large man with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention, but there was something gentle in his eyes when he looked at his son. "Thank you for coming, Elena," he said quietly. "I know this is unusual, but Vivienne has been very anxious about finding the right person to help with Nathaniel. She wants only the best for him." There was something in the way he said it, a weight behind the words that suggested this wasn't just about finding good childcare. But before I could ask any questions, Vivienne appeared in the doorway. "Jonathan, darling, you shouldn't be bothering the nurse," she said, her smile bright and sharp as a blade. "Elena has work to do, and you have that conference call with the Singapore investors." He looked like he wanted to say something more, but she was already guiding him out of the room with the practiced efficiency of someone used to controlling every situation. For the next 3 days, I settled into a routine. Care for Nathaniel during the day, spend time with Luna in the evenings, and try to ignore the growing feeling that something wasn't right in the Ashworth house. Vivienne was always polite but cold, watching everything I did with those calculating eyes. The other staff members were friendly but careful, speaking in whispers and glancing around nervously before saying anything that might be construed as gossip. It was the cook, Maria, who first hinted that all was not as it seemed in the Ashworth family. She was a kind woman in her 50s who had worked for the family for over a decade. While preparing Luna's baby food one afternoon, she mentioned casually that she was glad to see someone caring for the children who actually seemed to love what they were doing. The previous nannies, she said with a meaningful look, didn't last very long. They always left suddenly, usually in the middle of the night, without giving proper notice or saying goodbye. When I asked why, Maria just shook her head and muttered something in Spanish that I couldn't understand. But her expression was enough to make my skin crawl. That night, I held Luna a little tighter and wondered what I had gotten us into. But $15,000 was $15,000, and I had already endured 3 days. I could handle 4 more, couldn't I? The answer came on Saturday morning in the most terrifying way possible. I woke up to Luna screaming. Not her normal cry, but a sound of pure distress that sent ice through my veins. She was burning with fever, her little body rigid with pain, her eyes rolled back in a way that made my nursing training scream warnings. This wasn't a normal baby illness. This was poisoning. I scooped her up and ran for the main house, shouting for help. Maria met me in the hallway, took one look at Luna, and crossed herself. "Dios mío," she whispered. "What happened to her?" "I don't know," I gasped, my hands shaking as I tried to take Luna's pulse. "She was fine when I put her to bed last night. She needs a hospital." Now. Jonathan appeared, still in his pajamas, his face going white when he saw Luna's condition. "My car," he said immediately. "I'll drive." But before we could move, Vivienne glided down the stairs, perfectly dressed despite the early hour, her expression showing not concern, but something that looked almost like satisfaction. "What's all this commotion?" she asked, her voice maddeningly calm. "My baby's been poisoned," I said, unable to keep the desperation out of my voice. "She needs emergency care." "Poisoned?" Vivienne raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "That seems rather dramatic. Perhaps she simply ate something that disagreed with her. Children are so delicate, especially when they're not accustomed to quality food." The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't have time to process it. Luna's breathing was becoming labored, her lips taking on a blue tinge that sent every maternal instinct into overdrive. "Get out of my way!" I snapped, pushing past Vivienne toward the door. "My daughter is dying." Jonathan was already in the car with the engine running, his face grim with an emotion I couldn't identify. As I buckled Luna into the car seat with trembling hands, I caught sight of Vivienne in the rearview mirror. She was standing in the doorway, watching us leave with a small smile on her perfect lips. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was happening to Luna, Vivienne Ashworth was responsible for it. The hospital was a nightmare blur of emergency rooms, tests, and doctors asking questions I couldn't answer. Yes, Luna had been healthy. No, she hadn't shown any signs of illness. No, I couldn't think of anything she might have ingested that could cause this reaction. But the blood tests told a story that made my knees weak with terror. Luna had been poisoned with something called oleander, a plant toxin that attacked the heart and nervous system. In large enough doses, it was fatal. How is this possible? I asked Dr. Martinez, the pediatric specialist who was overseeing Luna's care. She's 6 months old. She doesn't eat anything but breast milk and the baby food I prepare myself. The doctor's expression was grim. Oleander poisoning in infants usually happens through contaminated food or water. Someone would have had to deliberately introduce the toxin into something she consumed. The word deliberately hit me like a sledgehammer. Someone had tried to murder my baby. I was sitting by Luna's bedside, holding her tiny hand and praying to every deity I could think of. When Jonathan Ashworth appeared in the doorway, he looked like he had aged 10 years since morning, his face gray with exhaustion and something that might have been guilt. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Fighting for her life," I replied without looking up. "The doctors aren't sure if the antidote will work in time." He was quiet for so long that I finally turned to look at him. There were tears in his eyes, and his hands were shaking. "Elena," he said finally, "there's something I need to tell you." something I should have told you the day you arrived." But before he could continue, Vivienne swept into the room like a toxic cloud, her presence filling the space with tension and barely concealed malice. "Jonathan, darling," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey, "you shouldn't be bothering Elena during this difficult time. I'm sure she needs to focus on her daughter's recovery." Her eyes met mine across Luna's hospital bed, and I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. Not guilt, not remorse, but satisfaction. She was enjoying this. She was enjoying watching my baby suffer, watching me fall apart with fear and helplessness. That's when Jonathan did something that shocked us both. He stepped forward, his entire demeanor changing from apologetic to commanding, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority I hadn't heard before. "Vivienne," he said quietly, "I know what you did. I know about the oleander extract you've been keeping in your private laboratory. I know you put it in the baby food that Elena prepared for Luna yesterday evening." The silence in the room was deafening. Vivienne's perfect mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something vicious and calculating underneath. Then she laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's ridiculous, Jonathan. Why would I harm a servant's child? I have nothing to gain from hurting some nobody's baby." But her voice was too controlled, too careful, and I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she calculated her next move. "Because," Jonathan continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "you found out who Elena really is. You discovered the connection between her and our family, and you couldn't stand the thought of sharing what you consider yours." Vivienne's face went white, but she kept her composure. "I have no idea what you're talking about. You're distraught about the child's illness, and you're not thinking clearly." "But I was thinking clearly for the first time in years," Jonathan said. "I was thinking clearly enough to have your laboratory tested this morning. I was thinking clearly enough to call the police and have them run a full investigation. And I was thinking clearly enough to finally tell Elena the truth about why you really hired her, and what you've been trying to hide from me for the past 6 months." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear over the sound of my own pulse. "What truth?" I whispered, still holding Luna's hand, afraid to hope that somehow this nightmare might make sense. Jonathan looked at me with an expression full of pain, regret, and something that might have been love. "Elena," he said gently, "you're not just some random nurse I hired. You're my daughter. And Vivienne has known it all along." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Daughter." The room spun around me as I tried to process what Jonathan had just said. My entire life, everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, my place in the world, crumbled in an instant. "I'm your what?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the beeping of Luna's heart monitor. Vivienne's carefully constructed facade finally shattered completely, her face contorted with rage and something far more dangerous. "You told her," she hissed at Jonathan. "After everything we agreed, after all the precautions we took, you actually told her. Do you have any idea what this means? What this could cost us?" Jonathan stepped closer to my bedside, his eyes never leaving my face. "Elena, 27 years ago, I had a brief relationship with a young woman named Carmen Vasquez. She was a medical student, brilliant, compassionate, everything that Vivienne pretends to be. When Carmen told me she was pregnant, I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to marry her, to give our child the life she deserved. But my family had other plans," Vivienne interrupted, her voice dripping with venom. "The Ashworth name, the Ashworth fortune, couldn't be tainted by association with some nobody from the wrong side of town. So we made Carmen an offer she couldn't refuse. We paid her $500,000 to disappear, to never contact Jonathan again, and to never tell the child who her real father was." The room was spinning faster now. My mother, Carmen, had always been vague about my father's identity. She'd told me he was someone from her past who couldn't be part of our lives, that it was better for everyone if I didn't ask questions. She'd raised me alone, working multiple jobs to put herself through medical school and then to support us both. She died in a car accident when I was 18, taking her secrets with her to the grave. "But you found me anyway," I said, my voice growing stronger as the pieces began falling into place. "That's why you hired me. That's why you brought Luna and me here." Jonathan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I've been looking for you for years, Elena. After your mother died, I hired private investigators to track you down. When I learned about your work at the community hospital, about the kind of person you'd become, I was so proud. I wanted to find a way to bring you into my life, to make up for all the years I'd lost. So you orchestrated this job offer, I said, understanding flooding through me. You had me hired to care for Nathaniel so you could get to know me, so you could figure out how to tell me the truth. His nod confirmed what I already knew. But Vivienne discovered my plan. She realized who you were before I could tell you myself. And she decided that the best way to protect her position, her inheritance, her control over the Ashworth fortune, was to eliminate the threat you represented. Vivienne laughed again, that same chilling sound. Threat? She said mockingly. What threat could a nobody nurse and her bastard baby possibly pose to me? But even as she spoke, I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew exactly what threat we posed, and she'd been willing to murder an innocent baby to neutralize it. That's when Dr. Martinez returned with news that made my heart soar with relief and gratitude. The antidote is working, he announced, his face breaking into the first smile I'd seen from him all day. Luna's vital signs are stabilizing and the toxin levels in her blood are dropping rapidly. She's going to be fine, Elena. Your little girl is going to be just fine. I collapsed into the chair beside Luna's bed, overwhelmed with relief, exhaustion, and the monumental revelation about my identity. But my respite was short-lived. Vivienne wasn't finished with her twisted game. You think this changes anything? She said, her voice low and dangerous. You think finding out who your father is suddenly makes you worthy of the Ashworth name? You're still the same pathetic single mother you were this morning. Still the same nobody who works nights to pay her bills. But I wasn't the same person I'd been that morning. The woman who had arrived at the Ashworth estate 3 days ago had been intimidated by wealth, impressed by luxury, willing to accept scraps from the tables of the rich. The woman sitting in this hospital room, holding her poisoned baby's hand while facing down a would-be murderer, was someone entirely different. Someone stronger, someone who understood her own worth regardless of her bank account or social status. You're right about one thing, Vivienne, I said, standing up slowly and meeting her cold stare with one of my own. I am the same person I was this morning. I'm still a nurse who cares for people regardless of their ability to pay. I'm still a mother who would do anything to protect her child. I'm still someone who believes in treating every human being with dignity and respect. And those things make me worth more than all your money and social connections combined. The police arrived then, led by Detective Rodriguez, a woman whose presence filled the room with competent authority. Mrs. Ashworth, she said formally, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Luna Vasquez. You have the right to remain silent. As the handcuffs clicked around Vivienne's wrists, her perfect composure finally cracked completely. She struggled against the officers, screaming about lawyers and connections and how she couldn't possibly be treated like a common criminal. But the evidence was overwhelming. Jonathan's security cameras had captured her entering the staff quarters the night before, carrying what appeared to be a small vial. The laboratory tests confirmed that oleander extract matching the poison in Luna's system had been found in Vivienne's private workspace. Most damning of all, her own computer contained detailed research about oleander poisoning in infants, including calculations about dosages and timing. As they led her away, Vivienne turned back one last time, her beautiful face twisted with hatred. You think you've won something? She shrieked. You think being Jonathan's bastard daughter makes you special? You'll never be anything but trailer trash pretending to belong in a world that will never accept you. Her words might have hurt the old Elena, the woman who had spent her whole life feeling like she didn't quite fit anywhere. But they bounced off the new Elena like rain-off armor. I had learned something profound in that hospital room. Worth isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the designer labels in your closet. Worth isn't determined by the neighborhood you grew up in or the school you attended. Worth comes from the choices you make, the kindness you show, the love you give, and the courage you find when everything is on the line. Jonathan approached me carefully, as if I might disappear if he moved too quickly. Elena, I know this is overwhelming. I know you have every right to be angry with me for keeping this secret, for not finding you sooner, for letting Vivienne's jealousy put you and Luna in danger. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect anything from you. But I want you to know that discovering you're my daughter is the greatest gift I've ever received. I looked at this man who had just turned my world upside down, this billionaire who shared my DNA but had lived a completely different life. Part of me wanted to be angry, to rage against the cosmic injustice of growing up poor while my biological father lived in luxury. Part of me wanted to blame him for my mother's struggles, for the years of uncertainty and financial stress that had defined my childhood. But anger felt too small for the magnitude of what had happened. Luna was alive. The woman who had tried to kill her was in custody. And I had discovered something more valuable than any inheritance. I had discovered that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, braver than I'd ever believed, and worthy of love and respect regardless of my circumstances. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and life-changing decisions. Vivian's trial became a sensation, with every detail of her privileged background and murderous jealousy splashed across newspaper headlines. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman so consumed with protecting her social status and financial position that she was willing to kill an innocent baby to eliminate a perceived threat. Her defense team tried to portray her as a woman driven to temporary insanity by the stress of discovering her husband's secret child. But the evidence of premeditation was too strong. The calculated research, the careful timing, the deliberate choice of a poison that would be difficult to detect, all painted a picture of cold-blooded attempted murder. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, a verdict that felt like justice not just for Luna, but for every person who had ever been dismissed or devalued because of their economic status. Jonathan kept his word about not expecting anything from me. He never pressured me to take his name, to move into his mansion, or to accept any part of his fortune. Instead, he focused on building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine affection. He spent hours at the hospital during Luna's recovery, reading to her, bringing her toys, and gradually earning his place as her grandfather through patience and love rather than obligation. When Luna was finally well enough to come home, Jonathan made an offer that surprised me with its thoughtfulness. Instead of asking us to move into his world, he offered to help me build a better version of my own. He funded the expansion of the community clinic where I worked, turning it into a state-of-the-art facility that could serve the entire neighborhood. He established a scholarship program for single mothers pursuing nursing degrees. And he created a foundation dedicated to providing free childcare for healthcare workers, ensuring that no mother would ever have to choose between caring for her own child and serving her community. But the most precious gift he gave me wasn't money or opportunities. It was the story of my mother, the real story of their relationship and her sacrifice. Carmen Vasquez hadn't taken his money because she was greedy or opportunistic. She'd taken it because she was brilliant and proud and determined to build a life for her daughter that didn't depend on anyone else's charity. She'd used that money to finish medical school, to establish herself as a respected physician, and to raise a daughter who understood the value of hard work and compassion. I learned that my mother had actually saved lives throughout her career, that she'd volunteered at free clinics and disaster relief efforts, that she'd lived the same values she'd taught me. The money from Jonathan hadn't corrupted her. It had freed her to become the person she was meant to be, the person who had raised me to understand that true wealth comes from the impact you have on other people's lives. 6 months after that terrible night in the hospital, I stood in the newly renovated community clinic, watching Jonathan play with Luna while I prepared for my shift. The little girl who had almost died from one woman's poisonous jealousy was now a healthy, happy toddler who brought joy to everyone around her. She had no memory of those dark days, but I would never forget the lesson they taught me. "Luna," I said, picking her up and holding her close, "someday when you're older, I'm going to tell you about the night you taught your mama that she was stronger than she ever imagined. I'm going to tell you about the evil woman who tried to hurt you because she couldn't stand the thought of sharing love with someone she considered beneath her. And I'm going to tell you about the grandfather who spent his whole life looking for us, and who proved that real family isn't about blood or money, but about the choice to love unconditionally." Jonathan looked up from the medical chart he'd been reviewing, his eyes soft with the kind of contentment that money can't buy. "You know what I learned through all of this, Elena?" he said quietly. "I learned that the best things in life can't be inherited or purchased. They have to be earned through kindness, courage, and the willingness to see the humanity in everyone you meet." As I began my rounds that evening, checking on patients who reminded me of my younger self, struggling single mothers and hard-working families who deserve the best care regardless of their ability to pay, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. Not because I discovered I was a billionaire's daughter, but because I discovered I was strong enough to stand up to people who tried to make me feel small. I'd learned that poisonous people will always reveal their true nature when they feel threatened, and that the best response to their toxicity is to live with such integrity and compassion that their darkness can't touch you. The foundation Jonathan established in Luna's name grew rapidly, touching thousands of lives across the country. But more important than the money was the message it sent. Every scholarship awarded, every clinic built, every family helped carried the same truth that had sustained me through the darkest moments of that horrible weekend. Your worth isn't determined by your circumstances. Your value isn't measured by other people's opinions. Your power comes from your choices, your kindness, your refusal to let anyone else's poisonous jealousy diminish your light. If this story taught you something about the strength you carry inside yourself, if it reminded you that you're more powerful than the people who try to bring you down, then share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember that kindness isn't weakness, that compassion isn't naive, and that standing up for what's right will always be worth the risk. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people discovering their extraordinary strength, and never forget that you have the power to transform any poison into purpose, any pain into power, any darkness into the kind of light that changes the world. The truth is, we all face people who want to diminish us, who see our success as their failure, who would rather tear us down than build themselves up. But we also all have the choice to respond with grace, to meet their darkness with our light, to prove that no amount of money or status can buy the kind of strength that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to apologize for it. Choose courage over comfort. Choose truth over convenience. Choose to be the person who lifts others up, instead of the person who pushes them down. Because in the end, that choice is the only thing that truly separates the worthy from the worthless, the powerful from the poisonous, the heroes from the villains in our own life stories. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.